It started just after 2:01 a.m., a single, piercing cry that cut through the stillness of the Florida night like glass shattering in a church. At first, the neighbor thought she was dreaming. Then the sound came again. Sharp, frantic, unmistakably. A baby, Mrs. Dalton, who lived 2 houses down, hesitated before picking up the phone. The Williams family had always seemed normal, quiet even, but the sound wouldn't stop. And in a town like Coral Pines where nothing ever happened, people paid attention to the smallest noise. Dispatch answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? I'm not sure, Mrs. Dalton whispered, clutching the phone with both hands. I think I hear a baby crying outside. It's been going on for almost 10 minutes. Something doesn't feel right. Officer Mike Riley arrived. 6 minutes later, the street was silent, save for the low hum of cicadas and the rhythmic creak of a wind chime on someone's porch. But no crying, no sound at all now. The Williams house loomed ahead. 2 stories, stucco walls, porch light still on. Riley knocked once, then again, louder. No answer. He circled the house and stopped dead when he saw her, Julia Williams, crouched barefoot beside the backyard pool. She was soaked to the waist, trembling, her lips moving, but no words coming out. Her nightgown clung to her like skin. "Ma'am?" he called, stepping closer. "Is everything all right?" She looked up at him slowly, blinking like she didn't recognize him. Her eyes were hollow. "They're gone," she said. "Who's gone?" "My babies. I left them with Daniel, and now—" She choked, trying to inhale. He said he'd watch them. I only went inside for a minute." Riley's gaze shifted to the pool. The water was eerily still under the porch light, casting long ripples like stretched silk. No splashes, no movement, no toys floating. On the surface. "Julia, where is your husband now?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't find him. I screamed for him." Her arms were scratched, her left knee bruised. She looked like she had fallen, or fought. Riley knelt beside her, speaking calmly. "I need you to stay right here. We're going to get help, all right?" Backup arrived in under 4 minutes. Floodlights bathed the yard in cold, artificial white. Divers scanned the pool. Officers searched the house, the garage, the street. No Daniel, no twins. The only sign of the babies was a damp receiving blanket wedged near a lounge chair and a half-empty baby bottle, still warm. Julia sat wrapped in an emergency blanket as paramedics checked her pulse. Her eyes didn't move, not even when an officer held up a tiny blue sock in a plastic bag. Riley stepped aside to make the call to headquarters. His voice was low, tense. "We've got a possible double infant abduction, father missing, mother in shock, no bodies, but—" He trailed off, glancing back at the pool. "We're not ruling anything out." Across the yard, Julia finally spoke. He said, if they weren't his, he'd rather no one have them. No one knew what that meant yet, but something shifted in the air, like the night itself had stopped breathing. And somewhere, just beyond the line of police tape and camera flashes, the silence stretched out, waiting to be broken. 3 months before the police lights painted, her front lawn red and blue, Julia Williams stood in the same backyard, holding a camera and laughing. The twins were only 2 weeks old, squirming in a blanket on the grass. Daniel crouched behind them, making faces, whispering their names like sacred spells. "Noah looks like me," he grinned, brushing the baby's dark hair back. "But Eli has your eyes." Julia forced a smile. "You think?" "Definitely." He kissed her temple, then lifted the boys into his arms, one on each side. "We made something good, Jules. Maybe this fixes everything." She nodded, but didn't. "Speak." The camera caught it all. Daniel's hope, Julia's hesitation, the thin line between pretending and believing. They were the kind of family people envied from a distance. White picket fence, clean SUV in the driveway, holiday wreaths, In November, no one saw the cracks unless they stepped closer. Inside the house, the nursery was a magazine spread come to life. 2 matching cribs, soft blue walls, tiny gold stars hanging from the ceiling, a mobile that played lullabies on a loop. Daniel had painted it all himself. Every stroke of the brush, every shelf he built, was a declaration. We are fine. We are better now. But Julia rarely entered the nursery alone. At night, she lay in bed next to Daniel, rigid beneath the covers, pretending to sleep. He would roll over, resting his hand on her waist, whispering, "You're safe. I love you. We're good now, right?" She always replied with the same word. Yes. It was easier than telling him that the sound of the twins crying sometimes made her stomach twist. Not from frustration, but guilt. She hadn't planned to get pregnant. And she certainly hadn't planned to lie. Caleb had left town before the tests came back. A one-time mistake, she told herself. An emotional lapse during a fight. But when the lines turned pink, she knew immediately who the father really was. And she said nothing, because Daniel had just started getting better. After the business failure, after the panic attacks, after the drinking and the screaming and the months of therapy, he had started to come back to her, the man she married, the man who built cribs and painted stars. So she let him believe, let him name them, let him call them his boys. She buried the truth under burp cloths and bath toys and the smell of formula. She prayed it would die there. But lies rot, and soon Daniel began noticing things. "Caleb stopped by today," he mentioned one evening. "Held the boys for the first time. You should have seen him. He looked weird. Not in a bad way. Just off." Julia froze. "What do you mean?" Daniel shrugged. "I don't know. Like he recognized something he didn't expect." She laughed, too loudly. "He probably just isn't used to babies." Daniel smiled, but didn't respond. He just looked at her for a long time, expression unreadable. That night, he rocked Noah until dawn while Julia lay awake, hands gripping the sheets, the weight of unspoken things pressing into her chest like a fist. Their picture-perfect life was cracking. But no one had noticed yet. Not the neighbors, not the church ladies, not even Daniel. But the babies were growing. And so was the truth. And, soon, the person she'd been avoiding most, the person whose face the twins were beginning to resemble, would come back. Caleb Williams returned like a storm without warning. One day he was a ghost, spoken of but never seen. And the next, he was standing at the Williams' front door, carrying a six-pack and wearing the same cocky smirk Daniel hadn't seen since high school. "Thought I'd come meet my nephews," he said, leaning against the doorway. "Heard they were cute." Daniel laughed and pulled him in for a hug. "It's about damn time." Julia stood frozen in the kitchen, dish towel clenched in her hand. She hadn't seen Caleb since that night. The night he'd kissed her like a dare, like a punishment, and she hadn't stopped him. Her stomach churned as she heard his voice float through the house. "Jewel," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "You look... well." She didn't. Her eyes were sunken, skin pale. "You shouldn't be here." He tilted his head. "I'm their uncle. Why wouldn't I be?" Daniel walked in with Eli in his arms, oblivious to the tension. "He looks just like you, doesn't he?" He laughed, handing the baby to Caleb. "Maybe that's why he cries so much." Caleb held the baby awkwardly, almost fearfully, but then something shifted. His hand rested on the back of Eli's head, longer than necessary. His gaze lingered, unreadable. Julia saw it. That flicker, that doubt. And that was the moment everything began to tilt. From then on, Caleb kept coming back. At first, it was casual. A barbecue, a football game, beers in the garage. But then it was daily, dropping by just to say hi, bringing diapers, holding the babies like they were glass, asking questions only a father would ask. "How many ounces do they eat now?" Are they sleeping through the night? Do they have birthmarks? Daniel welcomed it. He was glad to have his brother back after years of resentment, of distance, of watching their parents choose Caleb over him again and again. This felt like healing, but Julia felt it differently. She felt hunted. Every time she heard Caleb's voice, her body tensed. Every time he picked up a baby, her eyes scanned Daniel's face for a flicker of suspicion, but Daniel never looked. He trusted both of them too much. One afternoon, as she changed Noah in the nursery, Caleb leaned in the doorway. "They're beautiful," he said. "Don't," Julia whispered, not turning around. "You think I'm here for him," he said. "I came back for them." Her hands froze. "You said it didn't mean anything. You left, Caleb." "I didn't know," he said, his voice low. "You didn't tell me." "They're not yours," she snapped, turning to face him. "They never were." He stepped forward. "You don't get to decide that now." Julia's heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. "You need to stay away." A soft cry came from the crib. Caleb looked down at the baby, then back at Julia. "I can't," he said. "Not anymore." She slammed the door in his face. That night, Daniel asked her why she was so cold to Caleb. She told him she was tired, stressed, that she just needed space. Daniel kissed her forehead. "He's trying, Jules. He's not the screw-up he used to be." But he was, and worse, because Caleb had tasted a version of family that had once belonged to Daniel, and now he wanted more. And Julia knew, with a sick certainty, that this wasn't going to end with a few visits and awkward glances. It was just beginning. It started with a single question, asked too casually over a late dinner. Daniel was swirling the last of his beer in the glass. The babies had finally fallen asleep after hours of inconsolable crying. Julia sat across from him, arms folded, her food untouched. He didn't look up when he asked, "Do you think they look like Caleb?" Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. For a few seconds, all she heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the sharp ringing in her ears. When she looked up, his eyes were already on her. "I mean," he added quickly, "it's just weird. Eli's got that crooked smile Caleb used to have when we were kids. You notice that?" Julia forced a laugh. "Babies look like everyone, Dan. They change every week." He didn't laugh. He just nodded, slowly. "Yeah, you're probably right." But something had shifted. Later that night, she watched him through the crack in the nursery door. He held Noah against his chest, rocking gently, staring into the darkness with an expression she couldn't read. And then came the rain. Florida storms arrived like fists, sudden, loud, and relentless. The thunder began around midnight. Julia stood by the window, watching the lightning reflect off the pool. Her heart felt like it had swallowed a stone. She couldn't carry it anymore. The silence, the lies, the ticking time bomb of truth. So, she walked into the nursery, barefoot, soaked in sweat and dread. Daniel looked up from the rocking chair. "They're finally asleep." "I need to talk to you," she said. He smiled tiredly. "Can it wait?" "No." Her voice cracked. "It can't." She sat on the floor in front of him, like a sinner before a priest. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I made a mistake," she whispered. He didn't blink. "What kind of mistake?" Her throat closed. "Before we found out, before the tests, I was angry. You were gone all the time. Caleb came by. We talked. I drank too much. And She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Daniel stood so abruptly that Noah stirred in his arms. "You slept with my brother," he said flatly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Julia reached for him instinctively, but he stepped back like her touch burned. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "It was one time." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "Which one?" he asked. Her eyes welled. "I don't know. Maybe both." Daniel's jaw clenched so tightly she thought his teeth might break. He handed Noah to her slowly, carefully, then walked past her without another word. She followed him into the hallway. "Daniel, please, say something." He grabbed his keys from the hook. Rain was still pelting the windows like bullets. "You lied to me for months," he said, turning to face her. His voice was eerily calm. "You let me fall in love with them." "They are yours," she cried. "You're the one raising them. You're the one who—" "I would have died for them," he said. Then he opened the front door and walked into the storm. Julia stood there, soaked in guilt and thunder, the babies wailing behind her. She told herself he'd come back, but deep, down, in the part of her she didn't want to touch, she knew. Something inside Daniel had shattered, and when a man's entire identity collapses, what comes next is never clean. The front door stayed closed for 3 days. Daniel didn't leave the house. He didn't go to work. He didn't answer calls. Julia tried knocking on the bedroom door once, maybe twice, but stopped when she realized he'd locked it from the inside. The twins cried. She fed them, changed them, rocked them to sleep while her husband lived like a ghost on the other side of the wall. She left bottles by the door. Sometimes they were gone the next morning. Sometimes they weren't. By the 4th night, she heard something, faint, muffled, through the wall. Not crying, not footsteps. Laughter. She pressed her ear to the door and realized Daniel was watching home videos. Again, she had seen this before, years ago when his business collapsed, when his father died, when he used nostalgia like a drug to escape a world that refused to pause for his grief. On the screen, their wedding day, her veil blowing in the wind, Daniel's smile, proud and boyish, and beneath it, the steady voice of his past saying, "You may now kiss the bride." Julia sat in the hallway and cried silently. That night, Daniel finally came out. He walked barefoot into the nursery around 3 a.m. Julia watched from the bedroom doorway as he knelt between the cribs. He didn't pick them up. He just stared. "Noah," he whispered, "and Eli." The babies shifted in their sleep. The mobile above them spun slowly, playing a lullaby so soft it was barely audible. "I don't know who you are anymore," Daniel said, more to himself than to them, "but I know who I wanted you to be." His voice didn't crack. His hands didn't shake. That scared Julia more than anything. She stepped forward. "Daniel, please, talk to me." He turned around, and for a moment she saw something behind his eyes, something hollow and sinking. "I'm talking," he said, "just not to you." He walked past her without another word. The next morning, he was gone again. This time, he didn't take his phone. Just the car keys and a printed photo from the fridge. One of the twins, only days old, lying side by side in matching onesies. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't leave a note. But when he came back hours later, his clothes were soaked through with sweat. He smelled like salt and chlorine. "Where were you?" Julia asked. "I went to the pool store," he said. "The pool store?" "Bought a skimmer. Needed to clean the bottom." He wiped his hands on a towel. "It's been getting cloudy." Julia stared at him, unsure whether to scream or collapse. That night, he watched a video on repeat, one she'd filmed right after the twins were born. In it, he held Eli in his arms, kissing his forehead over and over. "I'm your dad," he said in the video. "Forever, okay? Doesn't matter what happens. I'm your dad." He played it 8 times before turning the screen off. Then he sat in the dark and didn't move. For hours. Julia lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the silence. Every now and then, a floorboard creaked. A baby stirred. But mostly it was quiet, too quiet. And in that stillness, she began to understand something terrifying. Daniel wasn't grieving. He was waiting. Caleb arrived late in the afternoon, wearing sunglasses and cologne like he had something to prove. Julia didn't invite him in. He let himself through the side gate instead, strolling into the backyard like it was still his. "You look like hell," he said, sipping from a convenience store coffee cup. "How's Daddy dearest?" Julia was holding Eli on her shoulder, rocking him gently. She turned and glared. "Don't call him that!" Caleb chuckled. "Right, sorry, sensitive subject." She hadn't seen him in over a week. Part of her had hoped he was gone for good, that his silence meant closure. But Caleb never stayed gone. He always came back, especially when he wasn't wanted. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice low. "I thought you might want help. Or maybe you missed me." He stepped closer, brushing a curl from Eli's forehead. "You know, it's weird. The more I look at them, the more I see it." Julia pulled back. "You need to leave." But Caleb just smiled, that same smirk he used the night he first kissed her. The one she once mistook for charm. "You know, Jules, it's funny," he said. "I never asked to be part of this mess. But now that I'm in it..." His voice trailed off, eyes on the baby. "It kind of feels like I should be." "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Pretend you care." Caleb's smile vanished. "You think I don't?" he snapped. "You think I don't lie awake wondering if I'll ever get to tell them who I really am?" Julia's voice cracked. "You're not their father, Caleb. You're a mistake, a lie I regret every single day." The words cut deeper than she expected. Even Caleb seemed stunned. But then he did something she hadn't anticipated. He laughed. "God, you're incredible," he said. "First you use me, then you shut me out. Now I'm just trash you're trying to forget." She turned to walk inside. Caleb grabbed her wrist, not hard, but enough to stop her. "I should tell him," he said. "I should tell Daniel everything, my side." Julia yanked her, arm free. "He already knows." For the first time, Caleb looked scared. "He what?" I told him 2 nights ago. "Everything." Caleb stared at her like the ground had shifted under his feet. And then, from behind the curtain, a shadow moved inside the house. Julia's stomach dropped. The back door creaked open, and Daniel stepped out. His face was unreadable, cold and distant, like the surface of still water. "I heard every word," he said. Caleb straightened. "Dan..." "Save it." Daniel's voice was quiet, too quiet. He looked at Julia, then at the baby in her arms. For a second she thought he might fall apart. But he didn't. He just stood there, calm, like he was trying to memorize the moment before it vanished. "You two deserve each other," he said finally. Then he turned and walked back into the house, the screen door slapping shut behind him. Caleb exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, that went well." Julia didn't respond. She watched the door for a long time, praying Daniel would come back out, say something, anything. He didn't. That night, he slept on the couch, eyes open, lights off, the house silent. The next morning, the pool was uncovered, and Daniel was gone again. The morning sun rose without apology. Bright, blue, ordinary. Julia spooned oatmeal into Noah's mouth while Eli kicked softly in his high chair, giggling at nothing. The kitchen smelled like bananas and burnt toast. The twins were babbling again, soft little syllables that sounded like questions no one could answer. Daniel stood at the back window, watching the pool. He hadn't spoken a word all morning. Julia watched him out of the corner of her eye, measuring his silence. There was something different today, something terrifying in its calm. No pacing, no tears, just stillness. He finally spoke. "I'll take them today." She blinked. "What?" He turned to face her. "You need a break. You look exhausted." I don't know if that's a good idea right now," she said quietly. "I'm their father, aren't I?" he asked. The room froze around the question, Not the tone, not the phrasing, the weight of it. Yes, she said softly. Daniel stepped forward and picked up Eli with a gentleness that made her stomach ache. He kissed the boy's forehead and then reached for Noah. Julia hesitated. Dan, he smiled. Not the crooked smile he used to give her, but something softer, almost sad. Just for a few hours, let me have one normal day. She handed Noah over slowly. Thank you, he whispered. Julia stood in the driveway and watched them through the front window after they left. Daniel strapped the boys into their car seats with the careful precision of someone doing something for the last time. She went inside, sat on the couch, and stared at the blank TV screen. The silence was louder than she remembered. At the park, Daniel let the boys crawl across a picnic blanket under the oak trees. He filmed them on his phone, narrating their every movement like a proud documentarian. That's Eli on the left. He just rolled over like a champ. And that little giggle? That's Noah. He always laughs at squirrels. He took them for ice cream next. Vanilla for Noah. A little strawberry on Eli's spoon. He wiped their faces with a napkin, savoring every sticky smear like it mattered more than anyone knew. At a stoplight, he played a lullaby on the stereo. The same one from the mobile in the nursery. The boys hummed and cooed in unison. He sang along, voice barely above a whisper. Sleep, my darlings. Close your eyes. Julia looked at the clock. 2:27 p.m. They should have been back by now. She called Daniel's phone. It rang once, then voicemail. She called again. No answer. A sick feeling climbed into her throat like smoke. She walked into the nursery. The cribs were still unmade. The mobile had stopped spinning. On the changing table sat a folded note she hadn't noticed before. It read only 2 words. I know. Daniel parked the car in their driveway and carried the boys to the backyard, one at a time. He laid out a blanket by the pool, set their favorite toys nearby. He sat between them, hands on both of their backs, steadying them. I love you, he whispered. I always will. The wind rustled the palm leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed, unaware. He looked at the water, and he wept. The backyard was quiet again. Clouds drifted lazily above, dimming the sun. The palm trees swayed. A bird chirped once, then fell silent. Daniel sat cross-legged on the blanket, the twins nestled beside him, cheeks flushed from the Florida heat. Their toys, a plush elephant, a teething ring, a rattle, lay untouched. The mobile lullaby still played faintly from his phone, the melody warped by speaker static. He reached into the diaper bag and pulled out 2 fresh onesies. He changed them slowly, methodically, wiped their faces, smoothed their hair. Noah cooed. Eli laughed at nothing. Daniel smiled softly, but it didn't touch his eyes. The pool shimmered in the sunlight, blue and still, glass-like. Its surface held no judgment. No sound. Just the reflection of a man who no longer recognized himself. He stood up, cradled Noah in his arms, and walked to the edge of the pool. Noah giggled as his father leaned over the water, as if it were a game. Daniel kissed his forehead. Once, twice. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then, gently, so gently, he stepped into the pool. The water swallowed him up to his chest. He held Noah close as the boy squirmed, confused. His breathing grew shallow. Daniel's face trembled. His eyes filled. I tried, he whispered, barely audible. God knows I tried. Then, in one trembling breath, he lowered Noah into the water. The baby cried once, just once, before bubbles replaced the sound. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He watched until the surface stilled. He climbed out, dripping, hollow, broken. Eli was still sitting on the blanket, reaching toward his father, unaware. Daniel wrapped him in a towel, kissed his cheek, and held him close. "I wish things were different," he said, more to himself than to the child. Then he stepped back into the pool. The sky began to darken. A breeze picked up. Daniel held Eli tighter this time, chest to chest. The baby blinked, confused, then closed his eyes, resting against the heartbeat he trusted. "I love you," Daniel whispered, and he let go. The pool rippled once, then again, then was still. Daniel climbed out slowly. His knees gave way, and he collapsed onto the pavement, shaking. He stared at the sky for a long time, watched the clouds pass. He thought of lullabies, of cribs, of blue stars painted on a nursery wall. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just sat there, water dripping from his clothes, mixing with the concrete beneath him. Minutes passed, then more. Eventually, he stood. He walked inside the house, each step heavier than the last. He peeled off his shirt, sat on the couch, turned on the television. Home video footage filled the screen. "Say hi, Noah. Say hi, Eli." Julia's voice chirped from the speakers. 2 babies giggled, 2 faces, full of life. He stared at them, motionless. Then the doorbell rang, and the illusion shattered. The neighbor had seen him from her kitchen window, standing alone by the pool, soaked, unmoving. Something had felt off. She called 911. When the officers arrived, they found Daniel sitting in silence, staring at the screen. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. Outside, a flashlight flickered over the pool. One officer turned away, swallowing. "Bile." Another whispered into his radio. "We have recovery. 2 infants. Send divers." Julia arrived just as they draped the white sheet over the side of the pool. Her scream ripped through the sky. Daniel didn't flinch. The sound of Julia's scream still rang through the yard as paramedics arrived. She collapsed to her knees in the wet grass, clutching her stomach like she'd been shot. 2 officers held her back as divers pulled tiny lifeless forms from the water. Noah first, then Eli. Both wrapped in white towels, their skin pale, their bodies motionless. A rattle drifted at the edge of the pool, bobbing like it still had something left to say. Julia reached for them with shaking arms, howling. "Give them to me, give them back," but they didn't. Because it was too late. Inside the house, Daniel sat on the living room floor, hands on his lap, watching old home footage loop across the TV screen. His clothes were still wet, clinging to him like skin that no longer fit. An officer approached with cuffs drawn. "Daniel Williams," he said quietly. "Stand up. You're under arrest." Daniel didn't move. The officer stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "We need you to stand, please." Daniel turned his head slowly. "Are they gone?" The officer hesitated. "Yes." Daniel nodded once. "Then I'll come." He rose with surprising steadiness. No fight, no resistance. He held out his wrists like a man handing over borrowed time. As the cuffs clicked into place, Julia was led through the sliding door by paramedics, wrapped in a blanket soaked with grass and tears. Their eyes met. She froze. He didn't blink. "Why?" she whispered. He said nothing. "Say it!" she screamed, lunging forward before an EMT caught her. "I trusted you." Daniel only looked down at the floor. Julia broke then. Truly broke. Her legs gave out. Her voice cracked into something unrecognizable. Her cries became heaves, her breaths like drowning. Daniel turned his back to her as they walked him out of the house. Reporters were already gathering beyond the yellow tape. Flashbulbs burst like tiny explosions. Shouts filled the air. "Daniel! Why'd you do it? Was it revenge? Do you feel remorse?" He said nothing. He kept walking. At the station, he was booked and processed. Fingerprints, mugshots, paper shoes, a cell with a rusted bench, and a buzzing overhead light that flickered every few seconds like it was trying to die too. A detective entered hours later, mid-40s, quiet, worn down. He slid into the metal chair across from Daniel, and placed a recorder between them. Before we begin, you have the right to remain silent. You understand? Daniel nodded. The detective pressed play. There was silence. Then Daniel finally spoke. I tried to forgive her. The detective didn't move. I tried to raise them like they were mine. I told myself love was enough. But then I started looking at their faces, and every time it felt like I was disappearing. Like someone else was wearing my skin. He paused. I didn't hate them. I swear to God I didn't. Eventually, he stood. He walked inside the house, each step heavier than the last. He peeled off his shirt, sat on the couch, turned on the television. Home video footage filled the screen. Say hi, Noah. Say hi, Eli. Julia's voice chirped. From the speakers, 2 babies giggled, 2 faces, full of life. He stared at them, motionless. Then the doorbell rang, and the illusion shattered. The neighbor had seen him from her kitchen window, standing alone by the pool, soaked, unmoving. Something had felt off. She called 911. When the officers arrived, they found Daniel sitting in silence, staring at the screen. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. Outside, a flashlight flickered over the pool. One officer turned away, swallowing bile. Another whispered into his radio. We have recovery. 2 infants. Send divers. Julia arrived just as they draped the white sheet over the side of the pool. Her scream ripped through the sky. Daniel didn't flinch. The sound of Julia's scream still rang through the yard as paramedics arrived. She collapsed to her knees in the wet grass, clutching her stomach like she'd been shot. 2 officers held her back as divers pulled tiny lifeless forms from the water. Noah first, then Eli. Both wrapped in white towels, their skin pale, their bodies motionless. A rattle drifted at the edge of the pool, bobbing like it still had something left to say. Julia reached for them with shaking arms, howling, "Give them to me! Give them back!" But they didn't, because it was too late. Inside the house, Daniel sat on the living room floor, hands on his lap, watching old home footage loop across the TV screen. His clothes were still wet, clinging to him like skin that no longer fit. An officer approached with cuffs drawn. "Daniel Williams," he said quietly, "stand up. You're under arrest." Daniel didn't move. The officer stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "We need you to stand. Please." Daniel turned his head slowly. "Are they gone?" The officer hesitated. "Yes." Daniel nodded once. "Then I'll come." He rose with surprising steadiness. No fight, no resistance. He held out his wrists like a man handing over borrowed time. As the cuffs clicked into place, Julia was led through the sliding door by paramedics, wrapped in a blanket soaked with grass and tears. Their eyes met. She froze. He didn't blink. "Why?" she whispered. He said nothing. "Say it!" she screamed, lunging forward before an EMT caught her. "I trusted you." Daniel only looked down at the floor. Julia broke then, truly broke. Her legs gave out. Her voice cracked into something unrecognizable. Her cries became heaves, her breaths like drowning. Daniel turned his back to her as they walked him out of the house. Reporters were already gathering beyond the yellow tape. Flashbulbs burst like tiny explosions. Shouts filled the air. "Daniel! Why'd you do it? Was it revenge? Do you feel remorse?" He said nothing. He kept walking. At the station, he was booked and processed. Fingerprints, mugshots, paper shoes, a cell with a rusted bench, and a buzzing overhead light that flickered every few seconds like it was trying to die too. A detective entered hours later. Mid-40s. Quiet. Worn down. He slid into the metal chair across from Daniel and placed a recorder between them. "Before we begin, you have the right to remain silent. You understand?" Daniel nodded. The detective pressed play. There was silence. Then Daniel finally spoke. "I tried to forgive her." The detective didn't move. "I tried to raise them like they were mine. I told myself love was enough. But then I started looking at their faces, and every time it felt like I was disappearing. Like someone else was wearing my skin." He paused. I didn't hate them. I swear to God I didn't. His voice broke. I just didn't know who I was anymore. The detective leaned forward. Why not leave? Walk away. Daniel looked at him, eyes hollow. Because walking away would have made me a stranger. I wasn't ready to be nobody. The detective said nothing. He simply turned off the recorder. Later that night, alone in his cell, Daniel lay on the floor and stared at the ceiling. No tears, no prayers, only the sound of a lullaby still playing in his head, over and over, as if the story hadn't ended yet. The trial began 6 months after the arrests. By then, the nation had already made up its mind. Florida, father drowns twins. After paternity reveal. Monster or madman? Inside the tragedy that shook Coral Pines. The courtroom was full before the gavel even dropped. Locals, reporters, family, members with hollow eyes and tissues clutched like lifelines. Julia sat in the front row, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Daniel entered in a grey suit that no longer fit. He looked thinner, older, as if grief had aged him by decades. He didn't look at Julia. Not once. The prosecution painted him as cold, calculated, a man so obsessed with legacy that he drowned 2 innocent children when the illusion cracked. Daniel Williams didn't snap, the prosecutor told the jury. He chose. He made a conscious, deliberate decision to end 2 lives because he couldn't bear to live a lie. Julia testified on the 3rd day. She took the stand with trembling hands and hollow eyes. Her voice shook through every word. He told me he loved them, she whispered. Every day. He called them his boys. I believed him. And yet, he killed them, the prosecutor said. Julia nodded, tears running silently. Yes. On cross-examination, the defense didn't attack. They didn't need to. They let Julia's guilt hang in the air. You kept the truth from him, the defense attorney said gently. I was afraid, she whispered, of losing him. And when he found out, her voice cracked. He changed. The courtroom fell into silence. Then came the footage, home videos. Dozens of them. Daniel bathing the twins, feeding them, singing to them off-key. Moments that blurred the line between fatherhood and delusion. The defense argued diminished capacity, psychological collapse, that Daniel had suffered a profound identity fracture, triggered by betrayal, driven by grief. A psychiatrist took the stand. Mr. Williams experienced what we call ego death, she explained. A total dissolution of self. The paternity reveal didn't just betray his trust, it destroyed the foundation of who he believed he was. The jury watched in silence as Daniel sat expressionless, eyes locked on the floor. Caleb never showed up. Rumors said he moved out of state. Others said he checked into rehab. No one knew for sure. Julia came back for every day of testimony, but not to support him. She came to witness it. All of it. As if watching it unfold piece by piece might help her make sense of the nightmare. On the final day, the judge asked Daniel if he had anything to say. He stood slowly, chains clinking at his wrists. I loved them, he said, voice hoarse. I didn't stop, not for 1 second. He paused. But love doesn't always know what to do when it's drowning. He sat back down. 12 hours later, the jury returned. Guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Life without parole. Julia exhaled like something inside her had finally broken open. As Daniel was led away, he looked at her one last time. No anger, no regret, just sadness, the kind that lives in bones. A year passed. The Williams house stood empty, its windows boarded up. Grass grew wild across the yard, swallowing the faded welcome mat. The pool, once pristine, was drained and filled with concrete, just a scar in the earth now, like something had been buried, and no one wanted to dig it back up. Neighbors never spoke of the family anymore. New couples moved into the neighborhood, unaware. Children played on sidewalks where yellow tape once flapped in the wind. Life had moved on, but Julia hadn't. She lived 2 towns over now, in a second-story apartment above a nail salon. She worked evenings at a grocery store and spent her mornings staring out the window, waiting for nothing. There were days she didn't speak, days she didn't eat, nights she still heard their cries. She kept one box, just one. Inside it, 2 hospital bracelets, a photo of the twins asleep on Daniel's chest, and a copy of their footprints stamped in fading blue ink. Sometimes she took it out just to hold the air inside it. She visited the cemetery once a month. The headstones were small, side by side, polished but modest. Noah James Williams, Eli Thomas, Williams born loved, taken too soon. She brought fresh flowers. She cleaned the dust off their names. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, she talked to them like they were still listening. "I should have told the truth sooner," she whispered once. "I should have left before I destroyed him." People asked her sometimes, in whispers, in awkward pauses, why she never changed her last name. She never answered, because it wasn't Daniel she wanted to carry forward. It was them. Daniel was transferred to Florida State Prison the day after sentencing. Cell Block D solitary. 23 hours a day in silence. 1 hour to walk a yard surrounded by fences and guards who wouldn't look him in the eye. He didn't speak much anymore, didn't write letters, didn't respond to interview requests or therapy sessions. But he did draw. Sketches filled his cell wall, hundreds of them. Crayon portraits of 2 baby boys with big eyes and matching pajamas. Some smiling, some sleeping, some underwater. Guard once asked why he kept drawing them. Daniel didn't look up. "They're all I have left," he said. He stopped eating for a while, then started again. Survived. Existed. Lived only because his body refused not to. The prison called Julia once. He asked to speak to you. She listened to the message in full, then deleted it. She never called back. Caleb disappeared. No forwarding address, no phone number. Some said he went north. Others said he changed his name. Julia sometimes imagined him living in a cheap motel somewhere, staring at hotel ceilings, wondering if the blood was on his hands, too. She hoped it was. Not for revenge, but because someone else needed to carry the weight. On the 2nd anniversary of the twins' death, Julia lit 2 candles. No one else came. There was no vigil, no news crew. Just her. She sat by their graves and whispered a song she once sang to them in the dark when they couldn't sleep and Daniel hadn't come home yet. "Sleep, my darlings. Close your eyes." The wind picked up, carrying her voice into the branches above. She didn't say Daniel's name, not once, because there are names that die with the crime and names that live only in grief. 10 years had passed, but the quiet of Coral Pines still carried echoes. The Williams house had been demolished 5 years ago. Developers replaced it with cookie-cutter townhouses. New families filled the streets with laughter, lawnmowers, and the hum of normalcy. No one remembered the tragedy that had once rippled across the neighborhood, except those who could never forget. Julia had changed her name, moved 3 more times, and worked in jobs that demanded nothing more than physical presence. Her reflection in the mirror was older than her years, her eyes carrying the weight of lives she had held in her arms and lost forever. She rarely spoke of the twins. When she did, it was to her therapist, in fragments of sobs and pauses. She visited the cemetery less frequently now, but never skipped the anniversaries. Every June, she stood before the small headstones, fresh flowers in hand, her fingers brushing the etched names. "Sleep, my darlings," she whispered softly. "Mommy's still here." Somehow, the words felt heavier with time. She imagined them older, walking, talking, arguing over toys, giggling uncontrollably in a sunlit yard. But she could only see them in fragments, frozen in the blue stars of their nursery ceiling, in the photographs she kept tucked away in a leather journal. Daniel remained in Florida State Prison. Rumors occasionally reached her through news articles, a broken man in solitary, drawing the twins' faces on scraps of paper, mumbling lullabies. Occasionally, a visitor would see him sketching at the edge of the yard during the 1 hour he was allowed outside. No one knew if he still thought of Julia. She assumed he did. How could he not? The twins had been the only bridge between them, and it had collapsed entirely. She did not want to know what his mind had become, the way grief and guilt twist a person when time stretches thin. Caleb's name had disappeared entirely. Friends, family, even distant acquaintances never mentioned him. He had vanished like smoke, leaving only memory, and in some ways, guilt. Julia sometimes imagined him alone, somewhere far north, thinking of what could have been, wondering if the twins would recognize him in dreams. For Julia, life had moved forward in quiet increments. She had learned to eat, to sleep, to laugh again, but not without a shadow, the kind of shadow that never disappears. It only stretches thinner with distance. She found solace in routine, grocery runs, evening walks, volunteering at a small animal shelter. Her life had returned to normal in the eyes of the world, but she carried her private world with her, one of whispered songs and empty cribs. On a summer afternoon, she sat in her small apartment with the journal open on her lap. She turned the page to a photograph of the twins in matching blue onesies. She traced their faces with her finger and whispered, "I'm still here. I love you." The wind rattled the window pane, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined the sound of tiny giggles, of Noah and Eli running across the yard, their hands intertwined. She opened her eyes, and the quiet returned. The world continued around her, indifferent and unforgiving. Yet Julia knew the truth that no one else could see. Some tragedies never fade. Some names, though whispered no more, live forever in grief, memory, and the shadowed corners of the heart. She closed the journal, stood, and placed it on the shelf beside the 2 hospital bracelets she had kept for a decade. She breathed deeply. The past would always be a part of her, but she could still move forward, step by careful step, carrying love, sorrow, and the memory of 2 small lives that had touched her completely. Some names are never spoken aloud again, but they are never gone.